Hi, I'm Stewart Spinks and welcome to episode 374 of my podcast, Beekeeping Short and Sweet. Well, happy December, everyone, and with activity slowing down around the apiaries, it's an ideal time to dust down those microscopes and see what's floating around in some of our honey samples. Beekeeping Short and Sweet, a beekeeping podcast for the inquisitive beekeeper with a short attention span. A beekeeper, in fact, just like me. This week's podcast is brought to you, in part, by Hive 5 Multi-Guard. So,
when you need a little peace of mind that your bees are safe from dangers of all kind, pesticides, hornets, wasps and mice are no match for Hive 5. The Hive 5 Multi-Guard is the best one in town. Keeps your bees safe all year round. The ultimate solution has been found. It's Hive 5.
The Hive 5 Multi-Guard fits nearly all beehives and makes beekeeping much easier. Hive 5.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to this week's podcast. Well, somehow we find ourselves in December. How on earth did that happen? Some things never change though, and in true beekeeper fashion, let's start with the weather. Is it ever going to stop raining, I wonder? I seem to have spent all summer looking at the skies for a glimpse of a rain cloud, without any sort of luck, of course, as I'm sure you can all agree. And now, well, let's just say the reservoirs must be getting back to some kind of normal level of stored water. Not that I'm an expert or live anywhere near a reservoir to be able to confirm it, though. It does just seem that we've had quite a lot of rain recently, and more to come. We have had some mild sunny moments too, and the bees have taken full advantage of that. Most nectar and pollen forage is long gone, although I did see some lovely bright yellow mahonia in flower just this week, and although there were no bees on it at the time, I'm sure the local bees would have found it fairly quickly. It's all quiet in the apiaries right now, as you would expect. When I have been out and about, there have been a few bees flying, but it's a total change from the apparent frenetic craziness of spring and summer. Not that the bees are ever uncontrolled. Everything they do has a purpose, of course. I do wonder if they ever do anything for fun. Hefting has shown all full-size colonies to be of a comparative weight, as you might expect at this early stage of the winter. This was mirrored with all of the nucleus colonies, and I don't expect to see any major changes in that until we pass Christmas and get into the new year. Then I'll be a lot more careful in the hefting process and watch the bees a little more closely. The question of treating bees with oxalic acid is a regular one at this time of the year. Remember, we need a broodless period for it to be at its most effective, but I don't know of any beekeepers that actively open up their beehives over the winter months regularly to check. And as I've said in previous podcasts, I'm not suggesting that you do or that you should. I've said that I would open up a hive to show what's going on, and maybe, just maybe, next week is the week. We do have some more drizzly rain in the forecast, but that cloud cover might just keep the temperatures high enough not to cause the bees too much of a shock if I do lift the lid, so to speak. We'll sit tight and see how the weather changes over the weekend and into next week, and make a decision at that point. Elsewhere around the apiaries, I haven't seen any green woodpeckers getting too close to the hives. I don't think it's been cold enough for them as yet, but I really must dig out the chicken wire and start wrapping some of the more vulnerable locations. You might have seen the frame washing video recently. It's such a chore, to be honest, but actually sometimes a necessary chore. I've finally made an executive decision and chosen to sit firmly on the fence regarding cleaning and burning. I'm going to clean some, but burn the really bad ones that are just simply going to take too much time and effort to get as clean as I want. It will need some additional frames being purchased in the spring, but I think it's good time management, and actually the cost comparison is fairly close when you take into account my time and the amount of gas and all the other materials that we need, and burning that gas to heat water just seems to take forever. For anyone contemplating their Christmas present wish list, can I again vote for microscopy equipment to find a place? The reason for this is that just this week I had a one-to-one microscopy session and actually remembered just how much I enjoyed the calm and precision of making up microscope slides. Not that you should take too much notice of the word precision. There is definitely a muscle memory skill involved, but that comes with practice. And in this instance, I believe the practice is actually where the fun lies. So my main topic today is another attempt to get beekeepers into microscopy. I know some of you are already badge-wearing, fully signed-up members of this growing group, but the rest of you just don't know what you're missing. Luckily, some beekeepers are falling in love with microscopy, and just last week I had my latest convert arrived. So Nick came into the office on Wednesday to get some practical experience, having watched my microscopy videos on Patreon. I say convert, I think Nick was already keen to get involved before he found my videos. By the way, if you're not a subscriber on Patreon, but simply want to see the microscopy videos, you can simply sign up to those. Honestly, it's probably more cost effective. Sign up to an annual Patreon subscription instead, because you get the microscopy in videos included. But hey, don't let me put you off. So Nick brought a couple of samples of honey from his own hives, and we decided to make up a couple of slides, one from each, using slightly different methods. I wanted to give him some options to try out once Santa drops off his Christmas presents. Fingers crossed for you, Nick. First up was the glycerin jelly with the saffronin stain already in suspension, and I'll talk specifically about this method. This is the easy and quick way of making up pollen slides. Saffronin stain is a pinky purple coloured stain and works really well in making punchy, contrasty grains of pollen suspended in a near colourless jelly. The process is very straightforward, and I would implore you to give it a go. It doesn't have to be expensive, and a lot of beekeeping associations have microscopes available for members to use. Just be cautious of the member that is currently holding on to that microscope. He or she might be reluctant to let it go over the winter months. Anyway, starting from the beginning, if you have a jar of honey that you would like to sample, all you need from it is around 10 grams of honey, so not a lot really. My sampling technique isn't necessarily being done for any reason other than to identify some of the pollen in the honey. I'm not trying to name the honey as a specific monofloral honey or make up a label as the same. So really, for me, the fun and pleasure is all about getting a really good sample of pollen onto a slide and being able to look at it for hours on end trying to identify it. And it can take quite a long time to get down to specific identification. If you want to go down the more scientific route, then stick to the 10 grams of honey, but I always like to add a little bit more. Pop this into a beaker and add enough water to make up a solution of around 25 to 30 mils in total. If you use warm water, you'll ensure that the honey fully dissolves into the water and none is left in the beaker when it's decanted out. If you have access to a centrifuge, the next step is super quick. If not, you have to be patient. Let's consider the non-centrifuge method. Tip the sample into a tall, thin container. A test tube would be ideal, and you can pick them up off Amazon very, very affordably. Pop this on a windowsill somewhere quiet where it can be left undisturbed for as long as you can be patient with it. A few days at least would be my recommendation. A week or more, even better. Next, very gently pour out as much of the solution as possible without disturbing the bottommost part of the test tube. This is where the pollen will be. You may be lucky enough to see a visible layer of pollen and debris sitting on the bottom of the test tube, or whatever it is that you're using. Next, get a plastic pipette or syringe and draw up as much of the liquid until there's only a small amount left covering the bottom of the tube. You can discard that liquid. At the very bottom, you should see the sediment left, and it's this that you want to use for your sample. Personally, I like to put this onto what's known as a watch glass and let it dry before adding the glycerin jelly with the stain in it. Then you can transfer it onto a microscope slide, but you can simply put the sedimented sample onto the microscope straight away. Let it dry there. It's easy enough to do on a warm radiator if you don't have a hot plate. And once dry, add a drop of the glycerin jelly stain using a small glass rod. Again, if you don't have a glass rod, a metal skewer or something similar would also work well. Enemy number one here is air bubbles, and you have to be very careful not to introduce lots and lots of bubbles. Otherwise, all you'll see is black circles with clear centres. Those are air bubbles. The only thing remaining to do is to carefully lower a cover slip onto the sample to protect both it and your microscope. It also creates a very thin layer between microscope slide and cover glass, which causes the liquid glycerin jelly to move between it using capillary action, thus creating a thinner cross-section to look through. It's all very clever, you know. Making up these slides is a doddle. It's the pollen identification that takes all the work. But there are some pollens which are so abundant and beautifully shaped that you can't help but remember them. My particular favourites are dandelion, looks a little bit like a triangulated puffer fish with lots of spiky bits. Hogweed, a tic-tac shaped elongated oval with large rounded ears in the middle. I call it Mr. Potato Head to remember it. And finally hazel, a perfectly round pollen grain, each identical in shape and size to each other, and you can use it as a measuring guide for other pollens, such is its consistency. But of course, there are so many types of pollen that a decent set of guides is an essential and actually a great idea for the Christmas present wish list. You will also need several books, so here are a few of my favourites, and in no particular order. Well, maybe the first one is my favourite. Dorothy Hodges' Pollen Loads of the Honeybee. You've probably heard of this, but you're most likely to get the booklet showing the drawings rather than the original book. If you can find an original copy, grab it with both hands. Rex Sawyer's pair of books, Honey Identification and Pollen Identification for Beekeepers, are both full of great help and advice. Margaret Adams' Pollen Grains and Honeydew is a great book with lots of images taken from slides of actual pollen, along with pictures of the plants themselves. And just a couple more: The Pollen Landscape by Joss Bartlett and Pollen Microscopy by Norman Chapman. Both excellent books for the keen beekeeping microscopist. I'll link them all in the podcast notes for you so you can just click through and see them. Just going back to the sampling and making up slides, if you're an impatient type or just don't have the time to leave samples to sit, you could always invest in a centrifuge, as I have. They're definitely affordable and freely available online. Again, I'll link some in the podcast notes. The effect of the centrifuge is that week's worth of waiting can be condensed down into just a few minutes, but please still try to be patient. Rex Sawyer suggests in his book that you spin your sample for around 5 to 10 minutes at 2,500 RPM. Once you're done waiting, the process is the same as the no centrifuge method. A more involved method, though, and this is my personal favourite, is to add the neat saffronin stain to the pollen and then add the clear glycerin jelly after that. The reason I like this method is it gives me more control over the amount of staining the pollen has. But of course, you can go too far or not far enough with it. So there has to be a lot more trial and, unfortunately, far more error. The stain in jelly suspension does provide a controlled amount of staining, but why choose a simple method when there's a far more involved process that takes way more time and very often results in far more failures? Where's the fun in that, I say? I really enjoyed my microscopy session with Nick this week, and I'm hopeful I was able to share some of my tips and techniques with him to make the process understandable and fun. One of the other ways of making up pollen slides is from a known plant. You simply take the flower from the plant and take a sample of the pollen directly from that flower. These can then be used to help with identification of pollens you might find in the samples of your own honey. Finally, and another very useful reason for having a microscope is to check for disease, particularly nosema. It's a very simple process, doesn't take very long at all, and if you have a colony that's looking a little slow and lethargic in the late winter, it's a useful test to see if nosema is the issue. If anyone's interested in learning more about nosema, do let me know, and I'll perhaps put together a Zoom session to discuss it and show you how to test for it. If you don't want to test for it yourself but would like a sample checked, have a chat with your local Beekeepers Association to see if you have a member who would be able to help out. And if not, drop me an email and I'll see if we can help. Well, that's it for this week. For all of you who haven't yet signed up to my Patreon page, I, together with Steph, have been creating beekeeping content for many years now. And if you're looking for some straightforward, down-to-earth tips and techniques, help and advice, then do take a look at my Patreon page. We have over 1,600 individual beekeeping posts, videos and podcasts filled with useful and timely help and advice. My approach is pragmatic and calm, sometimes entertaining, but always with help and support for beekeepers at the heart of what I do. I keep my videos short and concise wherever possible. No waffle, no flannel, just honest beekeeping advice from years of keeping bees. Take a look and join me for the new 2025 beekeeping season. It'll cost you less than a jar of honey. Head over to Google and search for Patreon and the Norfolk Honey Company.